It was August 1st, 2012. What you're looking at is a New York Stock Exchange. It opened at 9:30 a.m. and at that time nobody suspected that the day will go down in history as one of the greatest software error mistakes. So the question is, what happened? There was a group called Knight Capital Group, and they were the largest equities trader on the New York Stock Exchange. They had an obsolete function in code, and that function was designed to move prices lower or higher, and that functionality was hidden under the flag. So basically they had feature toggling. What they decided to do is to remove that functionality and repurpose the flag. So they removed the functionality and they deployed everything to production. The deployment involved manual procedure, and they deployed to 7 out of 8 servers. So the technician forgot to deploy to 1 server. Pretty great, right? On August 1st at 8 a.m. in the morning, the system started working, and it started processing pre-market orders. And the system produced 97 error reports. They had a chance to stop the disaster. It's just they never looked at those emails. At 9:30 a.m., the market opened and everything went live. And what happened after was a real catastrophe. At 10:15, they shut down the entire system. So they tried numerous times to figure out what happened, and they were not able to resolve the issue, so they just shut down the system completely at 10:15. So what do we know about that incident? In 45 minutes, they processed 212 parent orders, which doesn't seem much, right? But if you look from a different perspective, this was 4 million transactions, and it resulted to almost 400 million shares traded. Altogether, they made it $460 million loss in 45 minutes. Literally, they were erased from surface. They don't exist anymore. So they tried to raise some funds through different purchases and all sort of things. They never were able to recover. So from that day on, they pretty much are buried under the soil. If you're interested in that story, you can go for and read that. There is a full report. It's 9 pages long. So the reason why I'm telling you this story is we never really care about consequences until they hit us. And how often do we deploy our software? How often do we go and do our checklist and say, I've done everything on my checklist, nothing can go wrong? So what I'm going to talk about today is release management. Initially, I'll start talking about what release management actually is. And then I'll talk about how does that work with release management for TFS. And then I'll do a big demo, the entire loop through how release management for TFS works. And maybe if there will be enough time, we'll touch a bit of Octopus Deploy. Alongside, I'll do a bit of smackdown as I go, trying to compare features in Octopus Deploy and release management. But before we start, you have to understand how this session was planned. So this is how it is planned, and this is pretty much what the output will be, just in case if you'll be wondering what you'll be able to learn. So this is normally how the presentation look like, just that you know.
Who's going to be the annoying audience member?
I think it's going to be you, Adam, but I'll give other people an option too. Okay, one other thing I forgot to say. So I'll be happy to take questions, just short questions, and I'll try to avoid general debates, especially about ASP.NET vNext. It has been a hot topic in Canberra for the last 3 months, so we'll try to skip that here. So good evening, everyone. My name is Danijel Malik, and I am a Microsoft MVP for Visual Studio ALM. I joined ALM Rangers recently, and I do a fair bit of work on web here as a solution architect at SSW. Okay, so before we start, let me ask you a question. What do you think the release management is?
Deployment.
Process of a phase stage.
Where's the microphone?
The process of a phased and staged approach to move from
A development system through a variety of different testing systems and ultimately automated deployment into production.
Oh, that's very close. What else?
Testing all the way.
True. But the most important factor is missing.
Automated?
Nope.
A word you like and obviously I've not thought of.
Authorization.
So one guy is saying authorization.
That you've approved the movement as it passes from stage.
Fine. But what have we learned from that story? What they failed to do?
Testing and approval.
No, they tested it. It was their deployment sequence that actually buried them alive.
Yeah, so that's a pre-approved sequence of release change control.
Well, the main thing they failed to do is to protect the integrity of existing services. That was the main thing they failed because they didn't do it properly. But apart from that, yeah, release management is, by ITIL definition, planning, scheduling, controlling the build and test, and the deployment of releases for new delivering new functionality and meanwhile protecting the integrity of existing services. Does that make sense? It does. Okay. So if you want to keep it simple, it's pretty much, what is this stuff? Okay. Plan, build, test, release, support. Of course, you cannot forget about support and how you close if you're doing a one-time job. From a more complex perspective, release process looks like this. So basically you have to have release policy defined, you have to have scheduling, you have to have release criteria so that you know when and why you're releasing a few things. And then you have to think about, we might have multiple projects going on and they might be using the same release process. So there might be a case where you'll be releasing a small hotfix or a patch or a major version. Everything has to be clearly defined. And then you have multiple stages how this thing is being rolled out. Now, if you're a Scrum team, you probably do things a little bit more simpler. And I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this picture. So what happens here, we have developers on one side and we have operations on the other one. So developers will often push new value out to the product owner, and that's where we will start to see the bottleneck. So the question is why? Does anyone have an idea why the bottleneck starts down there?
handover between developers.
Handover between developers and operations.
Okay, and why is that so problematic?
Because operations have different goals. They're looking for stability and making sure that they don't have to change it.
Exactly. So what you see down there can be, in most cases, very complex because so many people are involved in this transition from development to operations side. It can be very chaotic, and as you have seen, if you have many manual steps involved, it can be very error prone. So that's why this bit should be automated. Now the question here is, what should we aim for? So what are the things we need to automate and why? So the first thing we need to automate is definitely deployments. You shouldn't be manually deploying to any stage. Does that make sense? It does. The next one is to automate the approval workflow. So whatever is happening should be just a single click. And it should involve the things that are predefined or whatever you have in the sequence, so that it's not like today Bob is deploying and tomorrow is, I don't know, Brian. So it should be pretty much defined. It's not like just, oh, Brian, can you deploy today? So it's very dedicated who will do something. The next one is probably the most important, is to deploy the same bits to all stages. So no release definition, no staging definition, you have the same bits and you carry them over different stages. This makes your code tested 4 different times rather than having something being probably tested, maybe not. And the last bit that's very important is full traceability. In case something goes wrong, you want to know exactly why it went wrong, and what stage it went wrong, and so forth. So if QA says red, you want to know why and what happened there. So what we'll do now, we'll go and look at how release management works and what are the key concepts there. So in release management for TFS, I'll call it RM because it's shorter. We have three main components. The first one is server. The server takes care of orchestration, and it does all sort of things up there. The next one is release management client. Now, we have two clients. One is web, which is with other words called empty page, and you'll see later why. And the other one is WPF application, which is pretty much serves as a configuration tool and all sort of things you can do in there. And the third component here are deployment agents, which come with some deployment tools. We'll see them later which one are. So the agents are the ones that are installed on different servers, no matter how many servers you have. On those servers, you install the deployment agents, and then through the agents, you deploy your code to different stages. So basically, what happens? On TFS, I run a build, and that build will trigger a new release. And it can be done manually if you want. It's no limitation here. And that server side will communicate with its deployment agents, and deployment agents will then look what is the deployment sequence or what is the workflow, and it will do all sort of tasks, get the files, install them on the server, and return fail or success, depending on what happened on the server. So this is pretty much the picture. So what you see here are the deployment agents. So installed on different servers on a different environment. And release management will then orchestrate the work. So basically, TFS will create a build, everything will be pushed to a drop location, release management will know where the files are, and then it will communicate with the deployment agents, and deployment agents will grab the files from the drop location and install it on the server. Does that make sense? Okay. There is another way how you install everything on your servers. It's called agentless deployment. That means that no agent is involved. And the question is, how can you install something on a XYZ server if you don't know that how to communicate with that server? Does anyone have an idea? Okay, David?
The connection you make to the new boxes has sufficient admin privileges to be able to do the work that you need to do. So basically you do everything remotely, or you push a PowerShell script or something or other else and have sufficient to be able to remotely execute that.
You're getting very close. What else? Anyone has an idea? Okay. Anyone heard about DSC? No one. Okay. So what is DSC? That's a new feature that is built in Windows Server 2008 R2. Sorry, 2012 R2, or in Windows 8.1. It's desired state configuration. It's PowerShell. And what does this do for you is, literally you start with a state on the server that you don't know what state it is. But if you run a series of scripts, you want to end up at a specific desired state. And that's what this PowerShell DSC does for you. So basically you can start with a completely unknown box and you can get it to a state where you want it. So how does that work? Basically the PowerShell DSC can send a description to the server to what state it's supposed to be, and that server has a few functionalities there that pretty much look into the features that are installed on the server. It'll just try to get something from registry or something like that, depends how you configure that. Test if that is properly installed, and if it's not, it will do that for you. We call this phase make it so. So basically, it runs everything on the server. Now there are a couple of ways how you can do that. One way is pull, and the other one is push. And pull is pretty much, if you have predefined resources pool, from where you actually get those MOH files, and then run those resources on the target server. The other way is that you can get something from the shared gallery, and there is PowerShell shared gallery available online, so you can get the resources from there. Or the version, something that we will be probably using, not in this demo, but as developers, is deploy the power, send the desired state configuration from the config file. Why would you want to do that? So imagine you have a production server and you want to have the same copy on the staging and on development. So you can build your own PowerShell script that will pretty much get the box that you have that's completely unknown to the state where the production is. And that will kind of allow you that when you're producing through the stages, you minimize the chance of making an error there, that something will go wrong in production. So this is how the MOF file looks. So basically you can specify what is your configuration, and then you add what nodes you'll be using. Nodes are pretty much machines. And then you define what kind of scripts, what kind of features you want to have there. And you can put all sort of things there. You can put your custom script, like I mentioned. You can have get, test, and set. I won't dive in those details too much, but basically that's how the agentless deployment works. So basically release management can have a step in the deployment sequence, and that will run the PowerShell DSC and then execute the PowerShell at the end. Okay, now we're going to our key concepts in release management. So now we'll start diving in how the tool works and what we have at disposal. The first one is settings or administration. We have under administration a couple of things, and I'll show them later. The next one is actions and tools. After that, we have a very important thing is environments and servers, and here I'll mention stages as well, because there are some interesting concepts coming here. There come release paths, and there are release templates and releases. So those three things can be very tricky to understand because they're not very intuitive to use initially. Okay, so let's start with settings. So basically here we have a couple of things like I can set the timeouts or SMTP configuration. There is a specific tab here. Should have highlighted that. So there is a specific tab for managing the TFS. Here I can manage groups and users, and there I have another option here to manage a pick list. So in the pick list, I pretty much see. Okay. So in the pick list, I can define what technologies specific I have at disposal, and then I can associate those technologies to specific servers. And then when it comes to deployment, if I choose I want to deploy only to servers that have specific features, I'll be able to filter all those things. So it's pretty much advanced. It's very flexible. Basically, the idea behind release management is that you can execute anything anywhere, and we'll see later why. Okay, the next thing are actions and tools. So action is a release step. So when you have a sequence of steps that happens on your deployment, action will be just a release step, and then you have at disposal like 50 or more than 50 actions. Something like you want to start Azure VM, or you want to create a website, or you want to copy a folder, or do all sort of things there. Now actions are using tools in the back. And basically you can have custom tools defined later, but out of the box you get 15 tools. They're completely independent, and you can pretty much get whatever you want in there. So as you can see, you have Azure VM Manager, you have IIS Deployer, DACPAC Deployer, you can have Xcopy command, everything's pretty much preset. So as I mentioned before, if you need, you can bring in your custom command. It can be I don't know, done by a PowerShell or CMD command, or you can get completely custom tool in. So what Microsoft does, they have a release management process that publishes developer tools that they use for later stages, initially on the deployment agents, and then they use those tools to do the deployment. So it's pretty exciting what they have done for their own stuff. Everything clear so far? If you have questions, just raise your hands. So we're not diving in ASP.NET vNext, so it's fine. Okay, so next thing are environments and servers. So this is pretty much what I would expect. I can have one environment that can have multiple servers, and vice versa. One server can be added to multiple environments. No problem with that. Now those servers in release management can be added manually. So basically you can go and click on the new button and create a new server. Or if you install the agent somewhere on the XYZ server, the agent will communicate with release management server. It will send a heartbeat, and server side will be aware of what servers are available, and you can add them by scanning. So as I mentioned, server can have multiple environments as well, so it's like many-to-many relation. And yeah, remember when I said you have different technologies at disposal? Here I can define what technologies I'll be using on a specific server, and if the server is not suitable, it won't be installed. One very important bit is how you can access the files. So by default, you access everything via UNC path, which means that the release management account, whatever is being used on the agent side, has to have access to your drop folder on TFS. That kind of makes sense, right? But the other option is via HTTPS, and in that case, the server will coordinate everything for you, but the server has to have access to the UNC path. And if the server doesn't have access, it's pretty much useless to use it. Okay, the next thing here that is important is a release path. So we might have different environments, and it doesn't matter how we progress from one to another. So we can have multiple release paths for one specific project. It's not a problem. So you might have something like this, that you have test, QA, staging, and production. But in case something goes wrong, you can have staging and production release path, and you can just decide that you will trigger that manually. Next thing here is release template. And release template is not really a good word for what it does. It's basically release definition would be much more appropriate. So it's a definition of a release. So how many of you are familiar with TFS build? Or with any kind of build tools, right? So in TFS, you have build definition, and you're familiar with that, right? So this is pretty much what is release template here in release management. It's a definition of a release. And that release template has a sequence which every time when you kick off the build will get executed. And in that sequence you have various components. You can create your own components, and I'll show you later how. There are different actions to be run, and there are some kind of workflow things happening in the back. How many of you are familiar with customizing build definitions in TFS? So using Windows workflow in the back. One, and that one barely. It's the same concept is being used here, so everything's running through the Windows workflow. It's just not, you don't see the XAML, but it is XAML in the back. Okay. So let's have a look at how a simple release template looks like. So what I have here is something they called Fabric Call Center. It's a demo solution from Microsoft. And on top here, I see different stages, and this is defined through release path. So basically, release path has multiple stages, and I'll show you later how I can do that. And then on those stages, I define what is the sequence, what will happen. Now, ideally, the sequence should be always the same through different stage, but in practice, this is never so. So it might happen that I'll have something simple for development and something completely different for QA, how I deploy. It's not really great that you have so, but that's possible through release management. Now, on the other hand, if you want to use Octopus deploy, this is fixed. You cannot do that. So in Octopus deploy, you always run the same procedure, no matter what environment you have. So the next thing I have here is a toolbox. And in the toolbox, I can see various components. And under components, there is a specific thing that's called call center site. This is a custom component that I can create for if I want to use a custom tool. Like, let's say I want to do Xcopy, deploy something, or just copy the files from my TFS output to one of the servers. And in that case, I would use a custom component, and I can define what will happen with that custom component. Anyway, the other thing we have here is control flow. So control flow is pretty much like you can create multiple sequences, you can run things in parallel. there are two important actions that are called rollback and rollback always. So rollback will fail only if the previous action fails, and rollback always will fail no matter what action failed in the sequence. This kind of makes sense? Okay. So if for some reason my sequence failed here, I can still use a rollback to get my server to the previous state. So this is the sequence, and as you can see here, I have used that sequence component from the control workflow, and there is this thing, I don't know, yeah, so this thing is a server, and later I'll show you something very nice. So in this case what I'm using is a server, but I don't need to use server specifically. I can use just tags and then define on what tag I want to deploy. It's pretty handy. So the first thing I have in the sequence when I'm executing this script, I want to remove an existing website if it's already there. Fine. So the next thing will be to copy files from one source to the destination folder, and then there is a custom thing that do some bunch of stuff. I think it's just copying something or maybe modifying web config files. And then the next thing is create a website. Does that make sense? So we remove an existing website from the application pool, right? And then we copy the files over, and then we bring the site back online. If something goes wrong, I have a rollback sequence, and I decide what I want to do. Now the tricky question here is, what happens if the rollback fails? It's like when you handle your exception, and then you get an exception when you're handling that exception. It's pretty much like that, but yeah, let's leave this aside. Okay, so let's have a look at release components. In the release component, we define where the build will be taken from. So here I have three options. The first one is if it builds with an application, so when the release will be triggered, it will just grab everything from the release template, and I can just specify what I'll take from the drop location forward. So basically, TFS will push something to my drop location. I know what that will be. I know the structure, and I can just go and grab whatever I want from there. The next option is where is my cursor now? Oh, here it is. The next option would be if it builds independently. Then I can choose what build definition I want to use, and that component will take whatever it was defined in that build definition. And the third option is builds externally. That would be useful if, I don't know, let's say you're doing Java. So you're not using TFS, or maybe you do, but maybe you use something else, and then you push things somewhere on the network share. And then you can decide this will be built externally, and then you can manually trigger release template, release management build, which is pretty much push a release out using a custom action, but that's fairly complicated. Normally you would go in 9 out of 10 cases you would go with this one if you're using TFS. And there are a couple of things you can define here in the deployment. There are configuration variables, and you can specify if you want to use, like let's say we're doing a website. And in the website, what you normally do, you replace configuration files like connection strings. That would make sense, right? So what you can do in release management, you can define your custom variable, and you'll put the server name in here rather than in your web config file and run the transformation, what you probably do now. So you can replace the value that would be in the web config file with something that's coming from here. And I'll show later how to do that. So yeah, I mentioned configurations and all those things. Now the last bit in the chain is releases. And releases like build that you run on TFS. As I mentioned before, it can be triggered manually or it can be triggered by build. And it's using the release template in the back. So when I define a release path, as you can see, I have various stages. And then I just, where is my cursor again? So here I have various stages that I can define, and in each stage I pretty much choose what environment will be used. I'll demo that a little bit later, but to explain a little bit further why is this defined? So imagine you have a case when your development environment is on premises, and you might have production on Azure. That is pretty much valid configuration. So if I want to define a fixed release path, I want to know what environments I'll be using. And here I have pretty much everything flexible, so I can decide to define environment on premises that will be used for dev stage. And then I can choose that I'll be using Azure environment for whatever is production or QA, all sort of things. Everything clear so far? Any questions? So you understand everything. That is great. Okay. So before I mentioned that there is a web application, which we call it an empty page. Now you see why. It's not very nice UI. It helps you do all sort of things, but it's not very great. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to switch to my VMs, and I'm going to demo everything I have shown so far. So let me duplicate the screen. Okay, let's go full screen. Great. So which VM I am on? App server. I want to go to TFS. So I have 3 different servers. 2 are application servers, and 1 is actually TFS server at the same time, and there is another DB server which is not used at this stage. But yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to open is a release management for Visual Studio 2013. Let me kill that conversation as down here. So this is the release management client. I hope everything's... Can you see it in the back? Otherwise, I can zoom in. Is that better? We'll have to move left and right a little bit, but yeah. So here on top, oh, now I lost the mouse. Great. Oh, here it comes back. So here on top, what I have is 5 different tabs. I'll move in a little bit. So yeah, it's administration, inventory, configure paths, configure apps, releases. Pretty big mess if you ask me. I still find it difficult to get through those tabs because the tool is so flexible and not everything is on the places where I would expect them. Anyway, let's go one by one. So in administration, let's switch to that. Initially, I have a profile, who's the account that's using the release management now. I can choose whether I want to use email notification for whatever thing that happens there. The next thing here is manage users and manage groups. So when we come to approval workflow, we want to have different users to approve or to validate the deployment. And then that's what we can define here, what user groups or users will be using release management. Now here I mentioned before different technology types. So here I have, first of all, 3 different environments. So I have dev, production, and staging. And on the far left side, I have technology types. So I have to go back now and click here. And in these technology types, I decided I will be using ASP.NET and SQL Server. It's not something you can pull from the servers. It's something you have to manually define and then just associate those flags with the servers. And you can use them later. I don't know, you decide how useful that is for you. Okay. Now this is a very important part where you define what TFS you'll be using. Without using TFS, pretty much you can't do anything. If you want to use Azure, there is another option here. So you add Azure subscriptions. That's a new thing that came in, I think, update 3 or update 4, not 100% sure. So if you're deploying to Azure, you'll have to add your subscriptions in here. And the last bit I mentioned here before, our settings, so I can decide what will be the maximum resource file size for tool, or what will be the timeout if something goes wrong. Here I can specify SMTP configuration, so if I'm sending out emails, I'll close up that a little bit. So here I decide what will be the notifications, where will the notifications be coming from, and so forth. Now there are a couple of things here in the deployer settings, so I can decide, I don't know, how often should they look for new packages, or when should they do the cleanup, and all sort of things. Another bit here are these configuration variables. These are global configuration variables. If for some reason I wanted to define something on a global level, that's where I would add those variables, and they will be used across all release templates or releases I'll be using, right? So this is the administration. How many of you got lost so far? Quite a few, right. There is no way to simplify those things. It's very complex, so I'll just try to explain what is very important for you. As I mentioned in the slides, there are plenty of actions and tools. These bits are important for you the most, because here you'll be deciding here you just see what tools you have at disposal, and those tools are later used in the sequence, so it's good to know what tools are. If you want, you can create new ones, but I don't think you'll need that very often. So basically you can decide here I'm creating action, and I can decide what tool I'll be using. So if I go with, I don't know, Xcopy deployer, it will give me some options predefined. I can put in custom parameters and all sort of things. And here on the other tab, I have tools. So those are tools that are predefined. It's the same thing. I can create my custom tools if needed. So I don't know what would be a case, because those tools that are in are pretty good. But yeah, if for some reason you have something, you can create one and do all sort of things with that. So here we have paths. Now, remember when I was showing you, you go from dev to QA to staging and to production? That's what you define here. So I already defined one release path. So this release path is pretty much what I said. I have dev, staging, production. That's my release path. I can have multiple release paths for a specific project if I want. That's perfectly fine. Now, if I open this guy, these are the stages that I defined in that release path. And now, how do I stabilize my mouse now? Okay. So here on the on each of those boxes, I have various steps, and one thing that I have to look at is whether the step will be automated or not. This is a very important flag. So if I have that flag turned on, that means that whenever I trigger a new release, it will be automatically deployed to the server that is being used on that environment. Doesn't matter how many servers you have. Now the next drop downs are important because we have to know who is the owner of that one, and there are two people or two key figures here. One is who will approve that, and the other one is who will go and validate that that was really okay. So if I have Lars here and he's the approver,
It's all you.
huh?
It's all you.
Yeah, I know, because I didn't want to define all the teams, so I created the virtual machines.
Daniel does all the work anyway.
I do. That's why Adam hired me. So in this case, if I have approver admin, that person will get a notification when I want to go to that specific stage, and he will say yes or no, and then me as a validator will go after that and check, okay, everything was deployed perfectly, so it's all good. And that's the case with all different stages. Now there is a fair bit of come on, mouse. Things you can decide who can do whatever there. So it's not really great. So you can decide what group will have specific permissions, view or edit, or also all sort of things. So if you want to limit the permissions there. Okay, we're getting closer to our release. So what I have defined here is agent-based release template. Now this means that this template, and it's called web app, it's something I predefined. I hope that, oops, that's visible enough. So this release template, I'll open it. It's a little bit slow because I have 4 different virtual machines running in the back, so it might take some time. Okay, here we go. So that's where we got to our sequence. How something will be deployed to our server. And this release template is done for agents. So I can deploy only if I have agents installed on different machines. It could be done if I have vNext release templates. vNext are those that you can do with PowerShell DSC. That's kind of the idea. Okay, I'll switch back and then wait again. Okay, it's back up. So initially what I did, I pulled here a sequence and I can pull another one, so it can be sequence in sequence. You can ask those things if you want, so it's not a big deal. But you have to have at least one sequence. That's how the Windows workflow works. The next thing I have here is I used a tag. So what I defined with tags is that I can have 14 or 50 different servers that will be defined as web server, and I can deploy to all in one go. Rather than deploying to one specific server, I can just mark them with tags and deploy to multiple servers at once. Does that make sense? Okay. So in that specific server group, I will then go and create a folder, copy the website to the folder, and create a website. So I skipped that remove website sequence that I could run, but that's pretty much fine. So here I have those tags defined. I can drag and drop whatever I want from the toolbox. I can toy with those things. I can, for instance, start an Azure VM. Now remember, what I'm taking from here are those actions that are here in the inventory, right? Okay, so I have defined my sequence that will happen on the dev stage, and I want to undo that. There is no way just to undo, so I'll have to open that guy again. Now there comes the next stage. It's staging, and then I have production. And I can customize those actions. I can say that I want to do all sort of things, run something in parallel here, and let's say I want to run that in parallel on different. So, well, I have to drop a sequence here again. And then I can decide what I'm going to do. So that is something that's valid, but I don't know how often you'll need that to change the deployment. Certainly there'll be cases, because the problem that was raised in the Canberra user group is like you might have production environment that will have all sort of things installed in the proxies. And the reason why it's hard, different procedure to deploy to that environment is because you might not always have resources to have staging environment that will be the exact copy. Normally you should strive towards that, to have the staging environment and production to be the same copies, but sometimes it's too expensive and people won't do it. Can you use the microphone?
You could easily have multiple, in the parallel environment, perhaps 10 or 20 servers that you're doing, whereas in staging maybe you wouldn't have the same 10 or 20
Probably
instances.
that would be an example why we would use parallel, for instance.
A single instance would be enough to validate it.
Yeah, definitely. So this is how you do it. Now, let's say that I don't have anything on that environment. I have to close that again and open. Come on. Okay. So let's say I start with something empty. I did. Now, oops, I deleted something. What should I do if I had different stages and I deleted something here? So I have this environment. So how do I get to that sequence that's there? It's pretty painful, huh? Well, luckily they put a feature in that's set copy deployment sequence. Have something on the right click. You can copy that and just say paste. Then it will ask me, if I'm using some tags, it will ask me how to map those tags So it's pretty smart. If I was using something different there, it would be a different tag mapping or something like that, specified for that staging. It would ask me what to use. So in this case it was smart, it picked it up. So here we go, and I'll do the same thing for production. I'll paste that in. Now one very important thing here is, if I look at those actions, I don't really know what will happen here. So it just says double click to view. Okay, let's do that. We see, okay, this site will be installed to C websites, web app dev server, all sort of things. I can expand them here as well. That's what I should do. Okay, let's have a look at what is done here. So this site, in the development stage, it will be copied to web app _dev, and it will create everything here. Now, I copied everything here as well, so I would probably have to fix them, right? But that's pretty annoying, isn't it? You have to go and just check in each sequence what's happening. It might be very fragile. So luckily, there is a better way of doing that, and you can just open that tab. So I'll remove that environment again. Go here and copy this procedure. So now what I'm looking here down at the bottom is what will be the variable for that specific create website action, and it automatically recognizes that that action is being used into different stages. And if I'm going to paste this here, map this here, voila, it's automatically figure out that there is another environment. Now it's much easier to look at those things. So I'm going to fix here this to say this will be staging. Copy it over. I'll replace this to say staging, and I'll say this one is production. And it would be probably smart to change the port numbers. So something like this should be fine. Now to switch between different actions, okay, let's give it a bit of time. Doesn't look good. How many of you think that this is now frozen? It died. Oh, it didn't. Great. So yeah, as I switch through the those components, I'll be using different environments. Oh, no, this one is staging. Looks like that my VM is struggling because there are other 3 running. So staging will be this guy, and high CPU usage and production. And I have to fix the same thing for the other one. So create folder to make sure that whenever I deploy something, it will be deployed to the correct folder. Is this right? Okay. Is everything clear so far? I see a lot of confused faces. It's not something that's very intuitive, but once you can figure all that and have a few cycles of running, you pretty much can't sleep at night. Otherwise, well, it depends on how much hazardous you are. You can still run your checklist. Okay, so now I have everything defined here. And what I can do from this moment, I can trigger a new release. Let's say I won't change anything because I had that pretty much defined. So no, I don't want to save this. But I showed you how it works. So what I'm going to do now, I will trigger a new release from release management, and later I'll show you how I can do that automatically from Visual Studio with continuous integration, and then how that it is being triggered in the release management. So what I'll do here is I have to give it a name. So this name is probably taken, so I'll give it a bit of a number. I can decide to what stage I want to push that release. So I can have an option to choose. It's not necessarily, here I don't have to follow how this will be pushed, but if it's automatic, I have to. So I'll push this to dev. I can click latest here, and that will take the latest build, the build that was successful. Of course, I can select one if I wanted to, and I can choose from which project and all sort of things. So I'll say, okay, this is fine. Start a new release. And now what will happen, it will grab the bits from the output folder of TFS, and it will go and deploy them to dev environment. Now, if you remember the release path I showed you before, it's good to come back here now. The reason why it will deploy there automatically is because I have that flag automated turned on. But it won't go to staging automatically because I want somebody to approve that first. Okay, so I can go back to my releases. Come on. And as you can see, something is happening here. It says that status is in progress. If I'm going to open this guy, great. I can see that somebody has to validate that. So the first step was done. It deployed, and I can go and have a look at what happened there. I can see log file for every specific action that was taken. So release management will take the output of any tool you run, no matter what. It will try to get the output and put it back in here. So it will tell me, okay, the IIS configuration tool created a website successfully, and then my xcopy function deployed all files correctly. So that's all good. And then when I had that tool to run the application again on a specific IIS app pool, everything worked fine. Okay, so what I'll do here next, I can, so this step is pending because it's waiting for for validation. Now let me have a look at who is supposed to validate this. Okay, validator, it's me. Now here in this case, I am logged in as administrator, so I'll have to switch to a different account. And here's a trick I learned this week. I didn't know that initially, but if you go to users, you can go here and say switch user account. Nah, it's not too smart. The Russian guy tricked me.
Just a quick question.
Yep.
While it's awaiting validation, is it available for use on that server?
So the question was, if I paraphrase, why is the validation needed?
No.
No?
The validation hasn't been performed, but in theory it's been installed successfully on the server and it's available and running and people can interact with it, yeah?
Yep. That is.
So the release has been complete, it just hasn't been validated.
Exactly. So basically, you have someone who will say and give a final stamp on it and say, yeah, that is fine. The tool can go and create it, but how do you know that everything is really successful? Oops. So right now I'm switching the account. Let me try a little bit slower. Okay. So right now I'm switching the accounts and going to the approval. That's why I had Danijel Malik everywhere in there, so that I'll need to switch between 3,000 different accounts. We'll just have to wait a little bit. Here it comes. And let's see if I go to that release management application. The VM is pretty slow. It wasn't supposed to be that much. So in the meantime, do you find this very complex, but do you see the benefit of doing this, or is it all confusing? Some feedback from other people?
Very similar to Octopus, isn't
Yeah, it is. So I'll show a bit of Octopus later, if we have enough time. So I'll just show a few things, and then we probably have 15 minutes of time to show Octopus deploy so that you can compare. So I'll go to IISc.
Quick question.
Yep.
If I don't want to have an on-premise deployment server, can I do everything in the cloud?
Yes, of course.
Don't suppose you feel like demoing that, do you?
Well, it's not in the demo here, so I'm deploying everything here on premises because the agent is configured so. And but yeah, you can deploy everything in cloud. It's not a big deal.
So the server is up there. The whole lot is a Visual Studio Online thing from end to end.
Well, if I understand correctly, here's the thing. Either you go and you install the agents on your Azure VMs, or you run PowerShell DSC, which will basically, you can create a VM there and leave it in a unknown state, and then run PowerShell DSC and bring it to the level you need, and then start deploying. That will be one option. The other one is that you go and install the agents there, and then the release management has to communicate with them.
I'm
but
more
that's
interested in the TFS at the moment has a TFS release management server, which usually you install and you run TFS and then off you go. I'm saying if you have absolutely nothing, no TFS anywhere, you're just using Visual Studio Online, continuous integration online, the whole lot is online, is there a release management process that is in the cloud that you don't have to install?
There is a service called Release Management that's part of Visual Studio Online and you can use. Okay. It's not part of this demo, it's fairly new and I haven't tried it yet, but that is an option, yeah. Okay, I don't want to use that web platform. Okay, so here is a release management. Now if everything's fine, we should see the empty website. I'm just calling the website. So well, here it comes. Otherwise, I'll switch to release management client. You'll be able to see from there. So basically what I have to do now is I have to validate that release is good and maybe approve it to go to the next stage or do some things in there. Should have given this machine a bit more power than the others. Maybe it will come up. For some reason it doesn't like it. Maybe I've misconfigured something, so I'll switch to the release management client. It used to work in the last session. Don't know why it died. Let me see if I can kill one machine here. Oops. VMs. And maybe shut down the DB server. I don't need it this time. We'll go back to TFS. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So hopefully this will start now. We're getting closer to this stage where I want to approve that and make sure that this is released. So as you have seen before, this was a manual release, and the next thing I'm going to show is what happens if I do a check-in on TFS and oh, that is weird. I have a bit of an issue now. Now what if I switch to the other guy? So what I can still do For some reason it doesn't let me do that. Maybe it's because I shut down the other machine and it needs that backup. So let me try to get to the other box. So the release that I created went to this folder because I defined it so. So let me go to TFS, switch back to the other user. Jesus, it is struggling with 2 gigs RAM. So the chances of something going wrong or slowing down are kind of exponentially increasing with the number of eyes looking at the screen or the projector, so I think the chances here of something going wrong are good.
Physical box got 16 gig.
Yeah, it does.
That's still a lot.
It is. I don't know why. Oh, hold on. It might be because it's running on battery and it's not using the full CPU. That could be a reason. Yeah, but the box is there. Huh. I have it down there. Can you just grab it for me? It's my name. It's written on it, and you can just take the power from there. So I think that high CPU stuff doesn't really work, even if it's high performance. It might be. So processor power management on battery, that's fine. Let me say it like this. Hopefully that'll speed it up now. Control on it. Thinking, yeah, thanks a lot, Rash. Okay, works much faster now. So we're back here with this client, and all I wanted to show you is to go to that release and just show what the folder was and what website it creates. Okay. But I have to go back to configure apps. Here it comes. So as I said, those tabs here are very confusing because they're not really intuitive at all. Okay, so right now I'm happening here. I'm on the dev box, and I'll double click. So the website I created is in this folder, and that's the website name, right? So one thing I created there is I defined tags. Let me just figure out where the tags were. So inventory, sorry, configure paths, here are servers, and each server, hold on, where are tags hidden now? Got lost a bit. Somewhere I defined tags, just that you know. And those tags allow me to deploy to multiple servers at once. So what will happen in this stage? Only app server was used to be deployed on the dev box. So I'll have to switch to the other guy because the deployment went through, but it's not appearing here, but it is appearing there. So I'll switch to that guy. And when I run that website, let's wait for it to come up. Okay, here is the website that I released using the release management. Now what I'll do, I'll just create a new release from TFS, and if everything goes right, the version number here will change, because that's the only change that I actually do on the website. Doesn't need to change much anyway. So I will go to the other VM, to TFS, and run here a Visual Studio. And all I have to do, I have to trigger a new release here. So let's queue a new build. Queue. It'll happen very fast. And this build will now trigger a release on the other app server because it has been configured. So let's see what is so important in the meantime. Update your trial license. Good to know. Good to know. Okay, let's see this guy. Okay, the build is running in the back. In the meantime, I can show you what I had to use. So if you want to use release management with and trigger the build from TFS, you have to use specific release template, and it has to be either you're using Git or Team Foundation version control. You have specific template defined. It's in one folder. You have to manually copy it here over, and yeah, it's not really nice, but that's the way how it works. And then you define down here what release, if you want to release or not, and then you can type in the stage if you want to release the specific stage or not. Anyway, this build should be done by now. It's still not. Okay, let's give it a bit more time. So one thing I'll show you in the meantime, when I go to my releases, sorry, I have to go to speed. Okay, so there is a custom component that does some sort of things. It's taking that package from there, and the deployment here is pretty much xcopy. What I could do here, I could define a new variable, and I haven't done that but one of the things you will normally do is modify the web.config file. And in that case, what I would do, I would just say, I don't know, dev database string, and I would just use that variable in release management. Sorry, in my web.config. If I wanted to change that connection string and replace it, what I would do, I would say double underscore dev connection string double underscore. That's how you can replace any variable in your code or in your files with whatever comes in release management. Now the tricky bit here is, how can I use that in development then? If I change that in my web config file, how can I use that in development? Well, one way of doing that would be if you create a transformation for your debug, and in debug you remove those variables and put your connection strings in or whatever you need. A second way of doing that is in release management. If I go to that component, hold on. Have to go back. Great, now we'll be looking at a different screen that I wanted because I clicked in the meantime to somewhere else, and the speed is not really great. So in here, in this component, now I'm back to that screen. Oh, here. Here I have to choose how that configuration variable will be used, and I can say after installation. So if I want to change something there, I can just say that variable name will be used dev. Pardon. So what was that dev connection? String. And that variable will be used, and I'll define that variable in the sequence. And one way of doing how will I specify is, well, what is being used. I can put a file filter and say star.config. That will just look at the web config files or whatever config files I have there. Now, if you don't want to use that development, so debug mode, to have the variables replaced here on your box and just leave everything by default, you can say, I want to use something like that. Create a different transformation, use those variables in there, and then when you come here, you can specify, I want to use it like .rm. But then you have, when you're deploying the files, have to rename the web.config file. Your call, what would be easier. I personally prefer just to have transformations done in the web.config file for debug mode, so that I can debug on my machine if I want to. I believe that in the meantime the build finished, and here it is. So we have a new version, it's called 1.0.15.021.1, right? That's the build that succeeded, and if the release management failed, the build would fail as well. So what I'll do now, I'll just switch to the other box on the app server. If I refresh, the number has to change, so here will be 21.1, right? Here we go. Let's see how that works. Yay, the number has changed. So my release procedure is now completely automated, and every time I check in, it will go to the dev environment. Of course, the tricky bit here is, on the dev environment, you'll start seeing a lot of updates coming up, because the development team will produce new check-ins every day, very frequently, and so forth. Now, as a team, or as a QA lead, I'll probably take just the last one every now and then. So what might happen is, if you're a Scrum team, you'll be releasing every day very frequently, right? But your QA team might not be capable of taking those bits in. So they might say, we're a version behind or a sprint behind you. And in that case, if new things are coming in, they will just ignore them. So as they come at the end, to the end of the sprint, they'll say, okay, we have tested everything you have done in the previous sprint. Now we'll take the last bit you have, and we'll continue and do the next things for the next 2 weeks or so. So the cadence there is completely different. That's why you have those different stages and approval, what goes somewhere. Okay, we have about 10 minutes. You want to see Octopus deploy as well? Okay. So I have to switch to TFS. So this is Octopus deploy. Believe me that the UI here is much nicer than the one you can see in release management, uncomparably. Sorry? It's made in Australia. It's coming from Brisbane. Is that what was the question? Yeah, yeah. So what I have here is pretty much the same pictures I had before. I have, well, here I have 4 different environments, but it doesn't matter. I have QA here that is extra. And then I have a release sequence defined, what goes to what stage. So basically here I have one project defined like I had before. I have different environments, and in environments I can define the same thing as I can do in release management. I can have various tags and I can deploy to that different tags. So in this case, on the dev box, I'll be using a web server. So if I click on one guy, I can specify what roles that server will have and how it will be used in a specific environment. So this DB server can now serve me as a web server and DB server at the same time, because I changed its purpose. But yeah, it can be one or the other. And I can have multiple servers on a specific environment. So that's pretty much how Octopus works. Then you have different projects. And on project, you define what process it will follow. So this is like the sequence we had in the release management. Octopus deploy is, on some occasions, way simpler than the other one. So yeah. In this case, to deploy the website to IIS, all I needed to do is to use one tentacle. So Octopus deploy, instead of actions and tools, they use tentacles. That's how they call them. So in this case, what happens? Octopus deploy works with NuGet packages. So whatever I create on TFS, I have to push that as a NuGet package somewhere, and then Octopus deploy can grab that NuGet package and deploys it wherever you want. So what I did in this case, I specified that I'll be using web app NuGet package that I created, and it's pushed into my Octopus default NuGet feed. And then I use something that's called what's that? Sharp, and there is something in the curly braces called website name. Now this is a variable. Those variables can be defined down here in the process. I think you have an option to define global variables as well. So here on variables, what I did, I defined website name, and I said I want to use for the web server, it's not really great, for web server on the QA, I wanted that the value of website is my website dash QA. And that's how I defined that for 4 different environments, so I can deploy to any environment I want, and those variables will be properly used for specific environment. Okay, so when we have that in the process pretty much defined, I can show you the rest of the things here. So I can say I want to use anonymous authentication, I specify a variable for a port, and all sort of things, and the condition is I can deploy to any environment I want. So there we have variables, and I can see the past history, what releases were. And there are all sort of settings that I don't know. I can change maybe a logo or clone a few things and all sort of things. That's much simpler than it is in release management. The UI, it's very intuitive if you ask me. I don't know, you make your decision. I'm just driving through very quickly. There comes libraries. And in libraries I define pretty much packages, what are my external feeds if I want to use a different NuGet server rather than the default one. So in this case, I'm just using the one default package. That one is being pushed from TFS, and I'll show you later how I did that. There are external feeds if I wanted. Now lifecycles, that is something that was introduced in the latest version. And lifecycle pretty much defines how I go from one environment to another. So in this case, what I had defined is that I want to go from dev to staging, but if I want to go from dev to staging, I cannot go to production because I have to follow that sequence, how I proceed. It's like release path in release management, you have to follow the sequence. I don't know what those extra script models are, I haven't ever used them. You can create your custom step templates. So when I showed you custom actions in release management, that's how you do it here in in Octopus deploy if you want to do that. And here you have global variables. So that's pretty much it. And what do we have here? Tasks. Oh, it just shows me the recent history of things that happened. So let's go back to one of those releases that happened here. And I can look at the task log and see what happened. So Octopus deploy gives you a full traceability of that as well. So if I want to go and promote to staging, it'll automatically enforce me to what environment can I go because I defined that in the lifecycle. I can try to change and go to something specific, but I cannot go to production, as you can see, because the lifecycle is enforced. So I can say, okay, fine, I'll go to from dev to QA, select that one, deploy, and what it will do, it will grab that NuGet package and deploy it to the staging environment. And this happens fairly quickly, so it shouldn't be a big problem. So on the dashboard now I see what packages are being deployed and in what versions are specific environments. So pretty much the same thing what release management offers you, just a little bit different. Now the important bit here, what you might look for is how you can push things from Team Foundation server automatically and how you can configure that, because by default you cannot do that. So first thing I did here, if I go and check the, I'll have to go to projects and find the process. And in here there is a new flag which says create a release when a package is pushed to the built-in NuGet repository. So whenever the new package will be added to the NuGet, doesn't matter manually or via TFS or some other tool, you can integrate it with TeamCA, Bamboos or whatever is that you have available. That will create, it will publish that action by default. So in my case, I have here another definition. It's a build definition. This one was used for release management. This one is for Octopus deploy. There were a few things that I had to modify to get it to push it automatically there. So first, before I do that, I have to look at what's the version that I'm using now. So it's 15.19.1. So it should be, the next one should be the same as I had with release management. Okay. So one thing that happens here is I modify the assembly version before I run the build. So that's something that happens. So instead of manually modifying the assembly version through the properties or running a script that will modify that, that's what the PowerShell script that I took from the TFS build tools or something like that. It's available on Codeplex. So there is a script that pretty much changes the version to what you want. And in this case, it is taken from build definition, so this is automated at all. Now the next important bit is here MS build arguments. And I'll try to get this into Notepad, so it will be a little bit better. Okay. So the first parameter here is run octopack equals true. Now octopack doesn't come with your application by default, and they had to use a hack in MS Build to run the octopack because they created a custom MS Build action that will do all sort of things for you. So run octopack true means that the output that I will get from the TFS will be pushed automatically to NuGet package, and that octopack is pretty smart. So what it can do for you, it can differentiate what kind of the output was, and then it will create appropriate packages. So if I was pushing out the console application and the website to the same folder, it will figure out what went to the web app and what was supposed to be for console application. So it does that automatically, you don't need to worry about it. Okay, so now when I go back to TFS, to here, run octopack will create a NuGet package for me, right? Now the next one is octopack publish package to HTTP, and then I provide in the URL, and this is the default URL. How do I draw on the screen? I can't. Control 2, no. Zoom it. I don't remember the shortcut for that. No, it doesn't work. It takes me back. Anyway, so that address that's being used, http/tfs NuGet packages, this is a default repository or default NuGet server, and the package is being pushed here. The tricky part here is the last one, octopack publish API key. This is not really great, so you have to provide the API key, and this is very fragile because if somebody sees that, can start pushing things in your NuGet server without a problem. So I wish there was an easier way, but yeah, in this case I just had to provide the API key, and that's how my Team Foundation server authenticates with the Octopus deploy server, and then I can push things as NuGet packages in there. So if we go back, we have I triggered that release? I haven't. Okay. One other thing I forgot to mention, run octopack is a NuGet package, and I have to download the NuGet package. So here I have that solution that it will automatically restore NuGet packages, but if I go in here in the folder itself and look at for the packages, here is octopack, and they're in content, I think not in this one, it should be in the other one. No, where they put it? Oh, in tools. So run octopack is being used by task. So this is pretty much a task that was written for MS Build, and that custom task actually runs the NuGet application in the back, and then it creates the NuGet package, and this is pushed through the TFS later. So if I'll just undo those things now, and then I'll just run a new build here. So Q new build, and if everything is fine, what I should see here, I'll refresh the screen. I should see this one automatically changing to a different version because it will be pushed from TFS. That will take some time for solution to build, but no more than 2 minutes, I reckon. So the other one was very slow. Normally they were very fast, but anyway, let's see what happens this time. So the other one is still ongoing. I wonder why. No. Machine is a little bit faster now, but yeah. So I hope you see value in one or the other product. I think they're both great. Probably the best on the market. I haven't come across anything better than this. And both give you flexibility to some extent. Release management is completely flexible. You can do whatever you want there. Octopus deploy is a little bit limited in some cases, but not too much. You can still write custom things in the edge, just you don't get them out of the box. But yeah, I like them both. Actually, I prefer Octopus because it has nicer UI and it's easier to learn. It took me a really short time to learn it. While release management, well, they know they have a fair bit of work to do. Great, so the build succeeded. And in the meantime, you can see the version being deployed here. So this action is in progress now. And if I haven't stuffed up something on.
Is Octopus also charged?
Yeah, so licensing policy is a bit tricky here. So Octopus gives you something for free. Octopus. I had that there, yeah. So we'll wait for the release to finish there. And here we have pricing for Octopus. So they give you up to 5 projects and 10 tentacles. They give you for free and it's limited to 5 users. And then here's how it goes, the pricing. So it's not bad. For what you get, it's a pretty good deal. Release management, they used to give you license for 2 deployment agents alongside, because it comes alongside TFS, so they gave you two agents free, and then you had to buy like $600 for each agent, and they realized that it's way too expensive. So now you don't have that limitation. If you buy TFS, they give you pretty much everything for free in the box. So you don't need to, but check the license policy. Microsoft is a little bit more complex about that. But I know that they stripped off that restriction.
And we've looked at 2 technologies. How do you think they compare to, say, something like TeamCity, which also... Well,
TeamCity is something different. TeamCity would compete with Team Foundation Server rather than release management, because TeamCity is a build engine, and they will build stuff. Release management will pick whatever is coming from a build and publish. It's completely different. Really? You mean abusing? You're abusing rather than using. Yeah, I know. I've seen people that want to have release done from TFS, and the template was customized to the extent where you did the deployment to all servers they had. So normally I would not advise you to do so, because those tools are designed for that purpose. Because in TeamCity, I don't know how you automate. How do you automate the workflow, approval workflow?
I didn't set that up, but we had 4 buttons, and you just said this is working, and you push a button, and the whole thing just deployed onto the next server. Oh,
interesting. Well, that
probably a few PowerShell scripts under the covers was doing all the heavy lifting.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that they have this functionality. What version of TeamCity is that?
I was doing this in 2012, so whatever version they were running back then.
And you're using TFS for source control, or
Yes.
so why are you using TeamCity? Just because of...
Have to talk to the system architect at 9MSN who set it up.
It's an interesting choice that you're having TFS as a source control and then using TeamCity as build, I have to say. Okay, let's see if that app was deployed. So this one failed, and this one is still taking a long time. Release management was faster. Wonder what happened, but yeah. One thing that's very important here, if the build failed, we would want to see what happened. Oh, right. So the DB server is dead. I shut down the DB server before, and that's why it's failing to deploy, because DB server has been marked as a IIS server, so somewhere down here in process. So let me change that first. Oops. Environment. So yeah, the mistake I did is that I said that the DB server actually acts as a web server as well, so I'll have to strip off that role. Let me go back. So this guy shouldn't be a web server, and we're good to go. And then it should, okay. So one cool thing on Octopus is that you can check which servers are offline and which are online. So I can check health and see what's the status of my servers. So one will fail because it's down, but yeah. Now if everything is fine here, maybe this one will finish now. Or I'll cancel it for now, because I set this up. Okay, I'll try this again now when this has been fixed. And you have to use the microphone.
So how do you compare Octopus Deploy and DSC, which we saw previously? Are there some things you can do in one?
What do you mean with DSC? DSC is desired state configuration. There is a way to do it with Octopus Deploy, and I haven't tried that yet, to be honest. But it is Octopus Deploy DSC. And I know that Paul Stovall has published something, so it's on GitHub. I don't know if that is a custom tentacle. Maybe it's available in the tentacle libraries. There is one library available here. So if you go to library, there was supposed to be, just let me figure out where's that link. Community library, here you go. In that library you can grab custom tentacles if you want it. But one that you were looking for, and I don't know if DSC is here. No, it's not here yet. But yeah, you can define whatever you want here. So you can pull those custom actions so that you can see how many you have at disposal for Octopus. Let me see.
My question mainly was like, if we should use the dev test production using the Windows Server configuration, or when we should use Octopus. Like, they do similar things, which promote from dev to production.
So if I understand correctly, you want to know when PowerShell DSC will give you advantage over...
Yes. How to decide whether to use one or the other?
Well, the simplest solution would be, if your environment is very likely that it will never change, then you can go with deployment agents and just leave with that, because it's fairly simple and you know it's reliable. In other cases, if you know that the environment might change and you want to bring it back to the state, then go with PowerShell DSC. and just run that up front to get the environment to the desired state, and then just do all sort of things for deployment.
Can I throw in a comment on that?
One of the things that you'd want to consider is, does that box always exist? Because the disadvantage on having to have the agent there to do the deployment is that if you have to build the machine and then you've got to deploy the agent and do everything to set it up, half of that work is, or maybe more, there's more effort in doing that than there is actually deploying your bits.
It's actually, you know, setting up a VM or something like that takes, in my case, I can give you an example. It took me
Well,
an
you've got to
hour.
set up the VM, then you've got to set up the agent. Whereas
Well-
if you're doing decide state, all you have to do is spin up a new box and then throw the PowerShell script at it.
Yeah, right. So the problem would be if you wanted to have SQL Server installed or something like that. You can do that with DSC as well. It's just that it's not that simple. And I think one of the MVPs, Colin Dembowski. DSC.
So what you're saying is
PowerShell.
that it takes more time to set up the Octopus deploy, the agent for Octopus, than to just spit out the PowerShell scripts. Could be.
So yeah,
Yep.
the advantage could be that you can set up pretty much whatever you want, and you can install SQL Server on that machine if you want it. It's not as, I think my battery is running out. No, okay. Okay, so this is the way how you would do it. That's a custom script, and oh, that's a good reason. In Canberra, I wasn't able to shut down the session, so this is the physical limitation of how long the session can go. Anyway, so this is how you would do it in PowerShell, how you would install the SQL Server using the DSC. But anyway, let's save this for a later debate, because otherwise we might not be able to complete the session. So the final bit that I wanted to show...
Can I just make one comment?
Yeah.
Probably more from a non-technical point of view is that I really see, you know, release management and all these tools are great, and they get you to the point of releasing, and if you've got a problem, yes, you can do a rollback. The sad reality is, though, the worst problems you get are the ones you discover when an hour later, 4 hours later, and the world's moved on. You've got new data structures, you've got data that's there. And
Yeah, so
and
the
my
thing is-
experience is very few technical and business people address that issue in release management.
Well,
'Cause
Microsoft is using those things internally, and I know some big companies here are using it as well. So you cannot prevent the human errors. That's why you try to limit them as much as possible. Now, one thing you can do with release management, and as well as Octopus deploys, if for some reason you want to have an extra fuse to say, I don't know, I want to make sure that my database is okay, you can add in manual step. And that manual step is not how things are deployed, but what you should do before that manual step is executed. And you can say, I don't know, I want to email my DB admin to take an extra backup of my database, or take a snapshot of the environment, so in case something goes wrong, I can bring back the environment in minutes. So that could be one way of handling that, and then you can deploy when you say, okay, we did that. There are a couple of ways how you do. It depends on, if you remember the slides, I said there were slides initially like what is the release process and what things you have to care about. So there was release scheduling, release criteria, and all sort of things. You have to address those things first, rather than think about, okay, we have project management, and release management is just a small bit of project management. It's actually vice versa. Release management sits on top of project management. So let me show you that the Octopus deploy worked, and then we can close the session. Where is that? Did we lose it? No. Okay. So this has been installed on the server that has that tag, and I'll switch to the other one, to the app server. It died in the meantime. So what happens here, I have 4 different environments, and everything has been deployed now to dev. So if I go here, the version of that one, So this one was coming in from release management, and this one is coming now, it's a different port. It's coming from Octopus Deploy. Both versions are the same, so this one is 150.21, and this one is 150.21. Okay. Are we back to slides here? Okay guys, so we come to the end of the session. Let's see what we have learned. So I hope everybody understands the importance of release management. It's good to remember the Knight Capital Group story. It can serve as a great reminder to everyone what can happen if things are not done properly. I hope you understand how things can work in the background, and once you're good to set them up, everything will work for you, so you don't need to care much about it. You have two great tools at disposal. I rushed through Octopus Deploy and I spent a lot of time on release management, but both of them are really good tools. You make your call and go for it. Oh, and guys, pizza is great. Make sure that your release management is too. Thank you.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.